Good morning. The last wedding I conducted, I projected my voice right through the mask, but in the interest of not getting in the way of the microphone, I think I'll take the mask off this morning. I want to thank our minister, Aaron Payson, and the members of our congregation for providing this opportunity for me to celebrate and reminisce about the 50 years that Linda and I have been associated with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester. As I think back over the last 50 years, I am reminded that Linda and I have enjoyed exceptional stability in our lives. Overall, Linda and I have enjoyed good health year after year, although we have both been treated for cancer. And in the aftermath of my cancer surgery, I will be wearing Depends for the rest of my life, but both of us are now apparently cancer-free. In an era when the average ministerial tenure was 7 years, I enjoyed 20 years of ministry with the Unitarian Universalist Church of Worcester, and that was a rich and rewarding experience in which I could hope to make a positive difference in the lives of individuals and, together with the congregation, to work at making the world a better place. I am fortunate to have a son who is 50 years old, who with his wife is maintaining a stable marriage and raising our 2 grandchildren. And they have lived nearby so that we could watch them grow and participate in their lives. I am fortunate to have enjoyed 54 years of marriage, although 40 and 50% of marriages in our society end in divorce. Marriage has not always been easy for us, but we have worked it out together, and on the balance, it has been good. Together, we have lived 43 years in the same home, while in society around us, on the average, people move every 5 years. And that we have participated for 50 years in a single congregation is also highly unusual, and the unwavering support of this community and the friendships that we have found here have been an ongoing blessing in our lives. Despite the stability in our personal lives, I am reminded that there has been continual and unprecedented change in the world around us in the last 50 years. Sex scandals have rendered all clergy subject to suspicion. Sex scandals have rocked the Boy Scouts of America, and all of us, we are no longer trusted to be alone with children. Humanism, once thriving in the Unitarian Universalist Association of Churches, has become marginalized. And nevertheless, there is a burgeoning percentage of the population who identify as nones, that is, as atheists or agnostics or as religiously unaffiliated. The membership in major church denominations, Protestant, Catholic, and Evangelical, has fallen precipitously, resulting in the closing and liquidation or merging away of large numbers of religious institutions, that is, Protestant and Catholic churches, as well as temples and synagogues and religious schools. This is the challenging environment in which our congregation lives and works, surviving and thriving in spite of the trends in society around us. Inflation has had a stunning trajectory over the years. When I entered Harvard University in 1960, tuition, room, and board totaled $3,000, and the average family income was $5,600 per year. Today, Harvard's tuition, room, and board totals $72,391, and the average family income is $78,500 per year. Note that while the college expenses have increased by 24 times, the family income has increased by only 14 times since what it was in 1960. When I took up my ministry with the Unitarian Universalist Church in 1970, my starting salary package, salary and housing, was $10,000. In 1974, my salary package was $10,400, and the total church budget was $26,800, and income that year was $22,000, with $4,500 withdrawn from endowment principal. Like college expenses, ministerial salary packages and church budgets have expanded radically in the last 50 years. I remember that Bill Baird was arrested and prosecuted for publicly displaying birth control materials and methods. In the 1970s, I was a part of the clergy consultation on problem pregnancies when abortion was illegal in most of the nation. New York State had legalized abortion in 1970, and it had earlier become legal in Puerto Rico. Our assignment was to refer women to practitioners and jurisdictions to which they could travel for safe and legal abortion. Alas, controversies over the availability of birth control and abortion are still with us. I remember when there were no women ministers settled in any of the Unitarian Universalist congregations in our district. I remember when we selected our first female president of our congregation. I remember when we learned for the first time that the majority of American women had work outside of the home. And I remember when women used to volunteer solo to teach a class in our church school for half a year or for a whole year at a time. And I remember that we had to shift to recruiting teams of teachers for shorter periods as volunteer time became harder to allot out of busy life schedules. Since the 1980s, there have been decades of growing income inequality, paralleled by the collapse of labor union membership and the offshoring of good jobs to other countries. In recent years, our political system seems to be spiraling down into chaos. Presidents have been chosen by a minority of the voting populations. Elections are marred by extreme levels of voter suppression and gerrymandering in order to preserve the standing of powerful men representing a minority of the electorate. We have a Senate whose majority is elected by a minority of the electorate and whose power is augmented by the anti-democratic tradition of the filibuster. And we have a political climate in which the survival of our democracy is in doubt. Furthermore, we have a Democratic Party that has moved so far to the right in much of what it represents that it resembles the other party that I wouldn't vote for 40 years ago. I have seen Romneycare, a health insurance program similar to one proposed by Richard Nixon, enacted in Massachusetts, and a similar program enacted as Obamacare on the national level. And still, 500,000 people are bankrupted by medical bills every year. And I have seen a right-wing party fight tooth and nail to destroy even the very limited national health insurance program represented by Obamacare. I have been giving money to organizations for the conservation of nature and natural lands all of my adult life, thinking that large segments of nature could be preserved forever. Now we know that the natural environment is changing radically. Species are becoming extinct at unprecedented rates. Climate is heating up. The glaciers and ice caps are melting. The seas are rising. Extreme drought is killing trees in large areas of forest. And wildfires have been running rampant in Siberia, Brazil, Australia, and the American West. I still support conservation organizations, but I know now that the world of nature that I love cannot be saved, at least in its present form. Antibiotics and vaccines have worked miracles. Yet new diseases have emerged to haunt the earth: Lyme and AIDS and COVID-19. In my youth and my young adulthood, I did not have to worry about such threats. But now, my former carefree enjoyment of nature is transformed. When I go out in the woods, I am afraid about ticks. I go anywhere and try to be careful. When I was a young man, I used to love to lie on my back in the moss in the forest and gaze up at the sky and enjoy the clouds. I don't do that anymore. When I go out to work in my garden, I am afraid. I go anyway and try to be careful. When I have to go to the supermarket, I am afraid about COVID-19. I go anyway and try to be careful. Amid the present pandemic, I have no idea when it will be safe to resume the activities that have been curtailed, or whether I will ever get to resume some of them. I have no idea whether I may contract the virus before the pandemic is over, and I have no idea whether I will survive if I contract the virus. On the other hand, I am glad to have passed through spring and summer and fall and to be still alive and healthy. This encourages me to think that it is possible that I may avoid the virus entirely. Whatever the future brings, my life in the present is good, and I do not obsess about worries about what the days and years ahead may hold. In the past 50 years, I have seen that some people of color have availed themselves of increasing opportunities and have risen to positions of prominence, power, and wealth in society. But the burdens of racism, poverty, inferior education, police violence, and police murder still haunt the majority of that population. When I arrived in Worcester in 1970, lesbian and gay people were deep in the closet, and bi, trans, and queer people were not even a part of our awareness. Gradually, we learned to accept and integrate into our church life all kinds of people from diverse backgrounds and identities. And as we have ministered to their needs, they have added powerfully to the strength of our congregation. And I remember when gay and lesbian Unitarian Universalists were first ordained to our ministry and began to serve our churches. And I remember when we provided rental space for worship to the Metropolitan Community Church because they could find no other space. We felt called to support the gay and lesbian community in that way. And I remember when we rented to a spiritualist church because no other church would rent them space. Our Board of Management agreed that we might reject their beliefs, but that we stood by their right to worship in the manner that they chose for themselves. Now, I am thankful to have lived when I have lived in the latter half of the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century, as these have been relatively comfortable years for a large part of humanity. And for me personally, life has been good. I have lived a life of privilege and prosperity. But the future represents a time of foreboding, less fortunate for humanity and for the world of nature. So this is a time of contradictions. In my personal life, in my relationship with family and friends and my church community, I am happy and well blessed. There I am rejoicing. And I am grieving for the state of the world around me, for the political chaos and incivility, for the violence and economic hardships that afflict people in America and around the world, and for the devastating changes that are happening in the climate and the world of nature around us. I talk with people who see the human race heading toward extinction on planet Earth, and I don't argue with them because I'm afraid that they could be right. I am reminded of the concept of the interim's ethic in the Gospel and the book of Acts. The biblical authors believed that the end of the world was imminent and stated repeatedly that it would come within the lifetime of those hearing their word. In the light of such a belief, all our material striving would be pointless. Why labor to pile up wealth or accumulate power in a world that is soon to vanish? Thus, a commentator wrote, although Schweitzer admired the spirit of Jesus and believed it had power for today, his thesis implied that the radical teachings such as turning the other cheek or going the extra mile make the best sense to those who feel that the world will end within their lifetime, and to feel that a consequence that earthly pride, possessions, and power mean little. Well, perhaps in the coming centuries, humanity can survive the challenges that seem to portend disaster. I have not entirely given up on seeing the world rescued from catastrophe. In the autumn years of my life, I will try to do my part toward that end. But whatever the outcome, even if these be the end times, I believe it is my assignment to live a life of human decency. And I think that must be a life of compassion for our fellow human beings, of generosity and of mutual aid. Above all, it must be a life consistent with human dignity and with my self-respect. Amen. So be it.